Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Koenen. I work for a small company out of Grand Rapids called Boxed Water is Better, and we're an alternative to plastic bottles for single-serving water. And we're rooted in sustainability and environmental endeavors. We are founded basically because we see the plastic problem growing. It is a big pollution problem. It takes 700 years for plastic to dissolve, and it only takes 10 minutes to drink one of these. And so it's a David and Goliath story where we are trying to take on the plastic water bottle industry, providing an alternative. And on top of that, we also use our consumers and we plant trees. So we planted over 600,000 trees in our national forests, because national forests and all forests are the filtration for our lakes and oceans. So we're trying to take on trying to help the water and the purity of the water by removing plastic from the bicycle, and as well as thinking forward, helping our reforestation. So that's Boxed Water, and that's why I'm here.
I'm Seth Bernard. I'm a musician, proud Michigander. I grew up in Lake City, grew up on Earthwork Farm. I've been a professional musician my whole adult life, but I'm also an educator and an activist. So I've worked with students on after-school programs and summer camps around creative empowerment, sort of using the arts to uplift people, to think about their stories, and to maximize their potential. In activism, I've done a lot of work across social justice and environmental spectrums, but lately I've focused on water. Being a Michigander, water is a conversation that just about everybody is willing to have. And if we look through the lens of water, we see a lot of other issues that are very important to be discussed. Issues of racial equity, issues of climate change, affordability. There's so much to talk about when we look at water, and we look at the challenges that we face and what the best possible outcomes are. So my latest project that I've been working on for the last year, but as a culmination of my adult life's work, is the Clean Water Campaign for Michigan, michigancleanwater.org. And we really wanted to spearhead an effort aimed at a lot of disenfranchised and marginalized voters to unify water issues around the state in conversations using storytelling and events. So putting on musical events, making videos, interviewing people all over the state, talking about water issues. And I love the fact that the Michigan House is increasing this connectivity around the state, and in a lot of ways it's breaking down silos that we're working in, which is really important right now. And so that's a big part of what the Clean Water Campaign's goal is. It's to connect some of these priorities, like in northern Michigan, of shutting down Line 5, people in the UP protecting Lake Superior, with serious human rights violations that are matters of survival in terms of the Detroit water shutoffs and the Flint water crisis. So all over the state there are different challenges. We've found that music and storytelling have this intrinsic power to bring people together and open people's hearts, truly. So we're working with a coalition of water groups, lots of artists, storytellers, and musicians, and people all over the state from all walks. We have a video series that just started on March 1st, and we've got a lot of fun stuff planned throughout the year and into the future. That's a little bit about me. Thanks.
Bonjour, Mitiguabak and Dijnakas, Jijak and Dodum, Namanitgang Donjuba. My name is Lee. I'm from the Crane clan, and I'm from the territories currently occupied by the state of Michigan and parts of Canada. I'm from the territories currently occupied. I have a lot of hope. I have a degree in international law, and I've been working on water issues most of my life, and forest issues. I think my first bit of activism was actually standing in Grand Rapids in front of the old Myers with a clipboard for the bottle bill. And we got 10 cents, it was 1976. And it was, I didn't want to work on a political campaign. And so I had an argument with my history teacher. So I settled on the bottle bill. Well, after the election, I was the only person in the room that won the issue. Most of them had worked for Mr., I think it was Vanderveen, who was running to fill Jerry Ford's empty seat, congressional seat. He did not win that election. So me making a big stink about everything, refusing to work on a political campaign, walking into the room as the winner on election day, and it was the Michigan bottle bill. But the context of that is, looking back at that history, that bottle bill at 10 cents, there was a great fear across the United States that this would infect all of the states. And I really thought, like in 5 years, every state would have a bottle bill. But one of the unintended consequences was actually the development of bottled water, juices, all of the different things that we drink now that avoid that 10 cents container fee. And so, I still see that littered all over the place, those bottles that are non-returnable. So that's kind of my early experience with activism and then a little bit of those unintended consequences. But I work with tribes and with communities in the state of Michigan. The Gun Lake Band, or the Match-e-be-nash-she-wish Band of Pottawatomi, but also the Nottawasapi Huron Band of Pottawatomis. And I work on restoring the Kalamazoo River that was destroyed in part by the Enbridge tar sands oil spill. Almost 8 years ago now, 1 million gallons of tar sands entered that river. And it is the largest oil spill, the most expensive oil spill inland in the United States. And I don't think we need to surpass that in any other part of the world, especially in Michigan. So as a human being, I like to consider myself living the art of being human. And it requires maybe appropriate technology. Maybe it requires a different sense. And I would just like to invite all of you, when I commonly ask people, like I'm going to ask you right now, who here has a treaty? I'm glad I've had this conversation with 3 or 4 of you, and I could see this one just 10 minutes ago. When I ask that in most common groups, if there's a Native person in the room, they'll raise their hand. They have a treaty. Guess who our treaties are with? If you're a U.S. citizen or resident, they're all with you. So you all have treaties. I only have to worry about a few treaties. You have over 300 treaties to worry about, and your government isn't doing very well. I don't think that's a big surprise. But I think the hope that I have for that change that we're all looking for is those treaties protect the forest, the water, the land, and the air. So when you see Native peoples out front fighting for these issues, like in Standing Rock, is because we have these treaties. And I hope and I believe that all of you begin to realize that you are an equal partner to that treaty with us. And again, you need to share that responsibility, in my opinion, as we become more aware. So I see the future of Michigan as breathing life into those treaties, living up to the spirit of those treaties, which really benefit all of our children and all of our future generations. So with that, I've had a chance to collaborate with a few people here. I'm looking forward to future collaborations all the way around. And that's it.
Good morning. My name is Shani Womack. I am from Flint, Michigan, born and raised. I am a counselor by trade. I've worked in the schools pretty much my whole career with children. Currently, I'm employed at Educare Flint, which is a brand new early childhood development building that has come about in part because of the water crisis. Our goal there is we work with babies from birth to age 5, and all these children have been exposed to lead-contaminated water. And so we are trying to mitigate the effects of lead, try to be proactive in addressing their health care, nutritional needs, educational needs early on before they begin to develop any of the outcomes that can be anticipated when someone has been exposed to lead and there is no intervention. So a big part of what the school does is not only meet the children's needs, but also the needs of the families, trying to make sure that they have adequate housing, that parents have jobs. If they want to go to school, they try to make those connections to get them into school if they're interested in furthering their education. And then just really educating the parents about how we have to move forward, because we all have been exposed to lead in the city of Flint, no matter of your age, young or old. And so we talk about things like diet and the importance of that as a lifestyle, not as just a temporary patch, because all of us who've been exposed to lead, it stays in your body for 15 years at least. And so one way to try to keep it where it is in the bone and not allow it to come out again, where it can go into your brain, go into other organs of your body, and cause some of the other devastating effects that we've heard about, is to have a great diet, high in calcium, vitamin C, and iron. So the children at the school have access to all those foods and fresh vegetables. The lunches are awesome. The breakfasts are great at this school. But we're beginning to teach them healthy eating habits and teach their parents as well. So that's a big part of what I do. But I'm also a singer and a songwriter. And so I'm a mom. That's the most important thing. I think that's what motivates me in my professional and my personal life, is that I'm a mom. And my kids were exposed to this lead. So it's personal. And when it happened, I wasn't sure what I could do, what I was able to do. I felt hopeless, helpless, angry, frustrated. And so I had a friend who just told me, just do what you always do, and that's right, and sing, and just do what you can to educate people about what has happened here and to help them, hopefully inspire them to act and to speak up and to be heard and to use whatever gifts or whatever talents they have to create change. And so that's what motivates me most of all. That's my goal, my mission in life and in Flint. And I feel like, God has really called me in a way to be in the city of Flint and to be a part of empowering the people and in keeping them encouraged and inspired to create change.
That's really great. I'm pleased that all of you have brought your remarks around to something positive and hopeful, because this session is about the Great Lakes, and the Great Lakes truly are often referred to as the state of Michigan's economic and environmental ace in the hole. It's what grounds our future. It gives us a lot of hope for where we can take the state and some of the economic opportunities for the state. And so I do want to make sure that we come back to the importance of the Great Lakes and water as an asset. But I also want to go back to Shani, if I can. And the CEO of the Mott Foundation was at a recent conference, and he referred to the Flint water crisis as the worst example of environmental racism in the country. And I wonder if we can talk a little bit, if you, Shani, want to say a few words about the impacts and the reason, or part of what people say is at the root cause of the Flint water crisis and the notion of environmental racism, and maybe touch on the emergency manager concept, because Flint is not unique, right? I mean, Flint is not the only place where there's been emergency managers, and talk about what that means to.
Well, if you're not familiar with the city of Flint, we have had some great highs, and we've had some really low lows. We were the motor city, the home of General Motors. There were people who flocked to the city of Flint, like my father did, from the South, just hoping to have a different life, to have a great opportunity, to make a great salary. People could come right out of high school and go into jobs where they're making, starting out $20 an hour, which was unheard of, at that time. Like, wow, that could even happen. And so a lot of people were able to live the American dream, be a part of this middle class, whether you were white or black or whatever you were. If you can get to Flint and get hired in General Motors, you got a future, and you can raise a family and you can be comfortable. And so things were great for a while until all of that the bottom dropped out, and we saw, I guess, really the end of the Industrial Revolution is what was really going on, but we didn't understand that at the time. And so then a lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of people left the city, and then what came next? I'm trying to think. There's so many things that have happened. I remember in the 80s, crack cocaine was a new thing, and that was something that plagued the African American population in the city. And now the city of Flint is a majority black city, you know, at this point in time, because a lot of people left the city years ago and moved on to the suburbs, people who, you know, who wanted to, I don't want to say, not necessarily be around African Americans, people who moved away. And so, because they could, you know, they could afford it, and they moved away. And so the people who were left behind were people who were poor, people who maybe didn't have, you know, the greatest education at that time. And so the city began to struggle. And we lost a lot of our tax base, so the schools began to struggle. And I think if you don't really adequately educate your children, then that really affects the future of, you know, your city or your town or our country, which is a whole nother issue I could talk about. But because Flint is a majority black city, it's a poor city, and we had lost a lot of people, lost a lot of our tax base. You know, if you don't have jobs, you don't have access to adequate education, people are dealing with drug issues. That breeds crime. And so Flint, you know, I'm sure you've heard, has also been named the most violent city in America many times. I think we still may be in the top 3 or top 5 for violence. And so then you add issues with local government, people not being really able to figure a way to navigate out of some of the financial difficulties that we were in. And we found ourselves in a situation where the governor thought it was necessary to provide an emergency manager. And when emergency manager takes control, that strips the local people, your mayor, your city council, local authorities of their individual power, their voice to decide or to choose what's going to happen in that city. The emergency manager is put in place to try to kind of right the ship and to resolve whatever issues financially are going on. So they had to make some tough decisions, is what we were told, and they have to make a lot of cuts. And so, you know, things like police was cut, and, you know, the water was the big deal that got us into this situation. To save money, he decided to switch from the Detroit water source to the Flint River, which is not a good idea if you really know the history of Flint River and different companies that were there who, you know, before it was illegal to do so, they dumped chemicals into the river. And so as growing up, I always was told that you don't swim in the Flint River, you don't eat the fish from the Flint River. There are efforts, you know, to clean it up and things now, but I just didn't sound like a good idea at the time, but that's what took place. And I don't know if it's because the people are poor or because they are minorities, black, Hispanic, or they didn't think we would notice that there was a change in the water. I don't know why they thought that they could do this. And then not only change the water, but then not properly treat the water to save a few more dollars. They're not going to add the right agents to the water that would make it drinkable and not make it less corrosive. It's really corrosion control is what they did not add to save a few more dollars. And so that's how the pipes began to, you know, further deteriorate and allow lead to leach into the water system. So the system, the whole idea, concept of emergency manager, from what I understand, since that it's a controversial law, but since it's been allowed to happen, it's only happened in maybe 3 or 4 cities. All those cities were very poor cities with the majority of black and brown people in those cities. So, you know, leads to the whole idea of this, in this case, environmental racism, but it's a part of a bigger construct in our society, just racism and white supremacy in general, that some people's lives are not valued as highly as other people's lives. And so that's the issue that is really behind all of this for me. So.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is part of the story of Michigan.
Right.
But Shani, you've been a resident of Flint. You've remained a resident of Flint. You talked about EduCare and some of the things that you're able to do. What gives you hope for the future of Flint?
Maybe I'm crazy. I don't. Well, I knew Flint to be a great place. When I was growing up, it was a great place to live and grow up. We had a real sense of community and camaraderie, a sense of family. It was a place where everywhere you went, people were very hospitable. And still to this day, the people in Flint are great. I mean, I've been all around, there's no place like Flint in terms of the people just really having a genuine concern and care for one another. You know, and so we just really try to look out for each other, take care of each other, and so it's just a place that, even though I tried to leave many times, it's just something about Flint that draws me back, and I just, like I said, I feel like I've been called to be there, especially at this point in time, to help.
Great. Thank you. Lee, you know, you and I, we didn't know this, I didn't know this about you, but we have a common origin in terms of our work in the environmental field. I also worked for the organization that was at the head of the Bottle Bill campaign, the Michigan United Conservation Clubs, very early in my career. So delighted to hear that. But you've seen a lot of changes, and I've seen a lot of changes in terms of the relationship that the Native American community has with natural resource management in the Great Lakes region. I've seen a change for the good, and I'm sure we have a ways to go. I've seen, as the state of Michigan has reduced its funding and support for natural resource management, that the tribes are really stepping up with some of the best science and the best data. Can you talk about some of the things that you and your colleagues and tribal leaders are doing for the betterment of the natural resources in the state?
Yes. In the big picture, our peoples participate on the International Joint Commission for the Great Lakes, and also we're part of the Great Lakes Compact. Some of the big discussions with Ontario, Michigan, or the 8 Great Lakes states. And we have property interest in the Great Lakes still, so we have commercial fishing operations. And to maintain those fishing operations as healthy, viable fisheries, the health of the Great Lakes and the biota in the Great Lakes is really critical for us. So we've had the sea lamprey coming in. We've had the introduction of salmon as a lamprey control issue. Salmon are not native to the Great Lakes. They were brought in the late 60s, 70s, and planted all over the state of Michigan. And then that fish has actually taken over the highest levels of the food chain, the very high trophic levels of the food chain in the Great Lakes. And so I know that now about 95% of what's living in the Great Lakes by weight, from the plankton to the zebra mussels to the goby, are all invasive species. And the tribes have consistently pressed the Fish and Wildlife Service and other international bodies about the health and quality of the water in the Great Lakes. So maintaining a native fishery is very important to us. It's one of our traditional foods. The irony of Michigan is that most of the fish that we catch are exported out of the state, and that Michigan people who eat fish import fish into the state. And so I see that as a paradigm that we have to embrace, realize that the Great Lakes are a part of our food chain, and what the greatest thing you can do is to take that fish into your body and have that become part of you, and then respect the bodies of water that help make that fish thrive. Tribes have been also working on air pollution issues, coal-fired power plants, which deposit the majority of mercury into the lakes in Michigan. And we've partnered with many organizations throughout the state, Sierra Club, Environmental Defense Fund, to combat these issues. Because right now, every single lake in the state of Michigan has mercury poisoning in it. There are limitations of how many fish that you can eat. So, women and children, maybe one portion of fish a month. Old guy like me, I eat fish all the time. And maybe that's my job, is to eat those fish, because the toxins aren't going to have the same, it's going to have a less of a disproportionate impact on me. And then I realized that our women and children in the Great Lakes cannot eat the fish that the Creator put there for us. And to me, that is a profound impact, where we cannot eat the fish, or women and children, women of childbearing age, because of the mercury toxins, which is it's a neurotoxin. Like lead, it inhibits development of thinking, of higher order, of understanding. And that's really a sad thing, that our children and women cannot eat the fish the Creator gave for us to be part of our life cycle and to share our lives with them. And I think about that almost every single day. So the tribes have been, I think, good partners in terms of stewardship of water resources, land resources, as you pointed out, Rob, the prairie lands, the forest lands, the wetlands, which are all part of a forest. When you say forest, it means kind of all those things. Those are the natural filters. And maybe that coal that we burn, staying in the ground, is part of that natural filter. There's probably a reason for that coal to be there. Like, leave it there. That's where it's doing a really good thing. So we've been working really hard, and we've been trying to make outreach. We're about 1% of the population, so we need allies. We can't make these changes without all of us thinking about them. So those are, I think, some of the contributions that Native peoples are doing in terms of helping to keep Michigan or to create or to facilitate Michigan getting greener and cleaner. And like I've said before, we've got 20% of the world's fresh water in the Great Lakes. If we can't create a green economy in Michigan, I need to know where it's going to happen. It's got to happen there. And I know there's enough people all around us that are looking at that. I see that developing, and I don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime, but I know, I think the wheel is turned. Maybe part of it was the fall of the industrial plant, or maybe the remaking of them along cleaner lines. So eat some good fish, eat some whitefish. That's probably one of the best things you can do to support native fisheries and help clean water in the Great Lakes.
And if you've never had Great Lakes whitefish, you're missing out. It's awesome. Speaking of clean and green corporations and businesses, there are businesses that are concerned about the environment and that are taking a sustainable approach in addition to Box Water. I wonder if you could talk about both Box Water's kind of sustainability philosophy a little bit more, if you would, Rob, and also what you're seeing as a member of the business community. Do you see allies, and do you see other corporations that share a similar philosophy?
Yeah, so it's fascinating to listen to these conversations because we're all approaching this subject from a different point of view, and that gives me hope just in itself that we within Box Water, we didn't realize, or at least I didn't realize all the other things that were going on, and it's cool to say, okay, wow, there is things going on that you're doing to help the forests. We're doing what we can do to help the forests. And overall, even this week we were talking about, we've donated to Flint, and we're going to continue to donate our water to Flint because that's important, and we're all in this together. To your question, yeah, so I came from a world where there wasn't a conversation about the environment and sustainability, and this job and this company is all about that. So from soup to nuts, we look at every day. We are looking at our carbon footprint. We're making sure that we're giving back. We're putting renewable resources back into the earth, and we're raising the awareness about the difference between recyclability and sustainability, which is something as an older individual I'd never known the difference. There is great deal of conversations and companies from across the country coming to us. So just to give some examples, Free People, which is a multi-billion-dollar apparel company, they approached us because they heard of the sustainability efforts that we're doing, and they want to be part of it. And they said, we love what you're doing, and more importantly, our consumers love the fact that you can give back, you can plant trees, you can give back to the earth instead of just taking away from the earth. And so they're stepping up, and I could name 5 or 6 other companies that are coming to us and saying, we want to be part of your story because it's important to us and it's important to our consumers. So traditional companies that didn't have this conversation before are reaching out to us to have this conversation. And I think, Patagonia is another one that we work with, and they're probably the best example of how you can be both corporately minded and sustainably and environmentally minded. And even as I say that, I start to stumble because nowadays I think those two go hand in hand. I don't think there's a separation, at least in the forward-thinking companies, between environmental and corporate objectives. We all know for a fact that's not through all corporate America, but I think that it will be. And again, I don't know in my lifetime, but last night I was with a group of CMOs from a lot of different companies, from Visa to Rag and Bone, so from fashion to finance. And we all were having the same conversation about how the consumer is driving these decisions towards environmental activism and environmental consciousness. And as the consumer pulls us, we need to be there.
Awesome, thank you. Seth, I wonder if you could say a little bit about Line 5. That was mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure if everybody fully understands what's at stake. But also I wonder if you're familiar with the Great Lakes Business Network. I assume you are, but if you could talk a little bit about both Line 5, what the future looks like for Line 5, and the role of the Great Lakes Business Network in that discussion.
Sure. So Lee mentioned the Kalamazoo River oil spill, biggest oil spill, inland oil spill in U.S. history. Just about 8 years ago that happened. That was Enbridge Line 6B, correct? So Enbridge is a Canadian multinational oil company, and 64 years ago, they ran a pipeline under the Straits of Mackinac. It's kind of the iconic place in Michigan. It's on our license plate, right? And this was before the Mackinac Bridge was put in. They ran a pipeline. It's just right there at the bottom of the water. You can see it. In fact, if you check out some of these videos that we've been publishing with the Michigan Clean Water Campaign or the National Wildlife Federation, Oil and Water Don't Mix is another great coalition to check out. This is a 64-year-old corroded pipeline that runs under the straits. And it's been operated by a company that's been very irresponsible. They're responsible for the Crystal Falls oil spill of 1999. They allowed 1 million gallons of crude oil to leak into the watershed before they dealt with it, and the cleanup is still underway. So Line 5 is a catastrophic time bomb that's ticking. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when it's going to leak. It was only intended to operate for 50 years. Enbridge is responsible to have a plan B. This is one of their responsibilities as a corporation. And the governor and the attorney general have the authority to shut it down. But as we've seen a lot in the way politics are done these days in our democracy, that their interests are shared. So, and it's a infuriating thing to see how easy it is to operate an oil pipeline when you can't have clean water that's safe for people to drink in one of our greatest cities. So if people want to learn more about Line 5, you can check out Oil and Water Don't Mix. But the organization that started sort of bringing other organizations together, there's lots of nonprofits that are involved with the Oil and Water Don't Mix coalition, among them FLOW, and the Michigan Environmental Council. We have an amazing environmental council that brings people from all over the state together. But they also started the Great Lakes Business Network, and this nonprofit is called Groundwork. It used to be the Michigan Land Use Institute. Good friends of mine, they're our chief partners with the Clean Water Campaign for Michigan. The Great Lakes Business Network is a legion of people who are business leaders, CEOs of Michigan-based businesses that are currently all calling for the decommissioning of Line 5. So all these people are calling for the shutdown of Line 5, and it's people all over the spectrum. Michigan's pretty well known for its craft brewing industry, and some good friends of mine, Joe Short and Laura Bell, with Short's Brewery and Bell's Brewery, have been big leaders in calling for the shutdown of Line 5. Larry Bell, the founder of Bell's, actually he asked at the Michigan Brewers Guild for there to be a vote to shut down Line 5, and they passed it almost unanimously. So you see that this is something that people are unifying around. This represents 1 million jobs. It represents our identity. As I said before, the spill would be catastrophic. So there's lots of ways for people to get involved. One of the ways that we're focusing on with the Clean Water Campaign is identifying people who are running for office, because just about everything is up for grabs in 2018. We have a lot of people watching the live stream. Hello to all the folks back there in Michigan. Really check people who are running for office. You know, people are starting to build their campaigns right now. Ask them where they stand. What are they going to do to replace lead and copper? The lead and copper rule is something we're going to talk about here soon. Where do they stand on privatization, prioritizing public water rights over private corporations? Where do they stand on shutting down Line 5? It's very important that our elected leaders are acting in our interest. And furthermore, I think we need a new era of public servants. And Shani, I think you would make a great governor. Shani Womack for governor. A true public servant.
Thanks. That's great, Seth. Before we go back to the panelists, we can continue to talk about issues in the future, but I want to ask if any of the folks that are sitting out here have any questions for this group of experts. Anybody? Yes, Lee.
I think it's important to understand that Line 6B and Line 5 head towards the industrial sector between Sarnia, about an hour's north of Detroit, and to the new Marathon Detroit refinery, which is in the most toxic zip codes in the United States. That Marathon refinery was built specifically designed to handle tar sands. So tar sands have been flowing into Michigan. Here we have the most toxic of oil products coming to where 20% of the world's fresh water is, and it's insane, in my opinion. So that plant in Detroit is going to be attracting, not just now, the issues we're dealing with, but it's also going to be attracting future oil shipments, maybe from Pennsylvania, some of that fracked gas. They're fracking up northern Michigan right now, and that plays with the watershed by destroying layers that actually will separate it out. So my question is, I guess to all of us here, is what are we going to do about replacing transportation fuels and replacing that Marathon refinery? Because as long as we still stay in that same mode, this problem's not going away. That's going to have to change.
So you're talking about energy, but it's also an issue of environmental racism. It's
environmental
just
racism.
Straight up. The numbers have been there for years, and they haven't changed. And communities of color and Native communities are disproportionately affected by the effects of the degradation of the environment. That's a case in point. The refinery is in Detroit, and children are breathing this air, and then the oil gets refined, and most of it leaves Michigan and goes back to Canada.
Yeah.
So we need cleaner energy.
I just wanted to make. I just wanted to make a connection to what Lee said and what Rob said. It sounds to me like the answer lies in the consumer and awareness. Would you say that's correct? As far as we're consuming oil, we're consuming gas, so in order for that to go away, we have to not only introduce the new technologies, we have to get on board. And so how do we do that? Because, if it was easy and affordable, we'd be doing it, right? So I guess my question is, it sounds like the answer comes back to us, the consumer, and I just wanted to make that connection. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
No, I think that's a phenomenal point, because what you know and what you say, probably 0.5% of Americans realize. Sometimes you don't realize with how busy people are, what little they don't have time to connect all the dots. As small as, I've talked to hundreds of people at events and said something as basic as, well, you know, plastic's made out of oil. And I would say 50% of those people have said, oh yeah, I never thought about that. There's so much around us that people aren't, because people are busy. It's not that that they're bad people. It's they don't realize this is going on around them, and they're not connecting the dots of forests, filter water, clean our ocean, plastics made out of oil, and is as bad as burning tires. It really is no different than that. They don't realize that fracking is affecting our watershed. And so it really is what can we do? We can continue to drive awareness. Because conversely, when I do say, well, you know, it is made out of plastic, and they go, well, it is made out of oil, and 80% of the bottles aren't recycled in the first place, and so it is polluting our world, people all of a sudden switch over and go, well, that's crazy. What you just said, that's crazy. And exactly. And then you know they're now informed, they are going to make a difference. And I do believe education and awareness and these sort of conversations, these panels, it's a small step, but it is going to make the difference, one person at a time.
What I like about the box product, the water box, is it's different. It's not, the majority of it is not plastic, but one of the old things that we used to talk about are the triple R's, the triple bottom line we've talked about, but the triple R, which is reduce, or reuse, reduce, and recycle. And as much as this is recyclable, to me, this is a brick in a house, which is a reuse, which is a higher order of sustainability than maybe recycling. And then the other thing I thought about, I guess this is consumer feedback.
No, it's good.
I guess the other thing I thought about is, you know, with the recycling costs, of course, and that takes energy also, but if you were to reuse this as a building material, filling it with insulative foam, filling it with the new concretes that are lightweight and insulative also, you've got a nice sized brick here, okay? And that cuts down in terms of, I think you mentioned about the lifetime cycle of products from beginning to end. Then you have not just a single-use product, but you have a sustainable, useful product. I'd probably buy a few cases and build myself a little brick barbecue outside in the back. But you know, how many of you have ever went to the coffee store and got one of those big boxes of coffee for an outing or a meeting? You know, I'd love to see this in a 5-gallon box for water, so that because there's so many events that happen at music festivals everywhere, where that would be an awesome, awesome thing to have. So I think there's a lot of hope in this product. I want to build a brick barbecue with this.
Seth, you mentioned the lead and copper rule, and I think this goes to the part of the story that Flint is not unique. Flint was an environmental disaster of epic proportions because of the impact that it had on our children, your children. But Flint is not the only place with lead in the plumbing, and our governor has called the national lead and copper rule dumb and dangerous for a variety of reasons. But Michigan is seeking to change that. Are you able to say a few words about that, Seth?
Yeah. So the Michigan League of Conservation Voters is a great organization that does voter education, candidate education. They do policy advocacy, and they actually they publish the way people vote, our elected leaders vote on conservation issues. Very, very helpful. And they endorse candidates, which is something that the Clean Water Campaign is not going to do. But one of the things that they're focusing right now in partnership with lots of other organizations, the Michigan Environmental Council is also taking the lead on this. But the idea is we have a lead and copper rule already, and the idea is to make changes. So we're advocating for the changes to be really strong and to really to remove all lead pipes quickly and safely. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to michiganlcv.org. Lisa Wozniak is the executive director. She's also on the National League of Conservation Voters Board. Great organization, and you'll find a lot of other pathways to protect the water in concert with a lot of great organizations. Another thing that's happening right now is the People's Water Board of Detroit are advocating for a couple of bills that are really important right now. So check out HB 4393, which offers shutoff protections to Detroit residents, as well as HB 4389 and 90, which is advocating for decriminalization. So you found that as wages have gone down, the cost of water has gone up. And through emergency management, we've seen municipal water supplies privatized. So these organizations, their job is to transport water from point A to point B. We're not supposed to have to pay for water. We're supposed to have to pay for the transport. That's a universal human right. It goes back to Roman law that water belongs in the commons. So we found that with our leadership, the way that it has been, there's been some human rights violations that have brought the UN to Detroit to investigate. And so these are some great pieces of legislation that we can advocate for through the People's Water Board and other organizations in Detroit and around Michigan. HB 4393, 4389, and 90. And again, it's the lead and copper rule. Public comment goes till March 21st, so we still have some time to get our voices in there.
And if this rule does get passed, which it's been proposed and the state is leading the effort, it's likely to become law. It'll be the toughest lead standard in the nation. So that's a really hopeful thing for the future of Michigan once it becomes. But it's controversial because it's going to require every city to replace the lead service lines in every home within 20 years. And that's going to cost billions of dollars for municipalities and potentially passed on to the ratepayers. So equity and affordability is a huge concern and an issue that needs to be addressed as we go forward with addressing this problem. Any questions or comments from the folks in the audience? Okay. Seth and Lee, why don't we go to Lee? Are you able to speak to one of the curses that we've experienced in the Great Lakes, which is invasive species? I'm sure as a Native American and somebody that's connected to the fishery, you've seen the changes that have occurred in our ecosystem in the Great Lakes. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah. I went fishing one day. I pulled up this thing out of the water, and I had never seen it before. It looked really ugly. And it was a goby, I think the green goby. Yeah. I'd never seen such a thing in my life. This is probably like 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. And then found out that it is fast becoming one of the major invasive species. We also have now the quagga and zebra mussels, some of which will harbor E. coli bacteria. And so, given the change in water quality and then the rivers flow into the lakes, the rivers recharge the lake. So it's important that the Flint River, which heads into Saginaw Bay, where the Kalamazoo River, which heads into Lake Michigan, all the great rivers in Michigan, and we have plenty of them, are part of this recharging of the Great Lakes. And then the wetlands on the margins of the rivers are important filters where a lot of the just sediment that would normally come into the river watershed stays in the wetlands and doesn't get into the rivers. And then from a commercial point of view, they have to dredge Grand Haven, Benton Harbor, Saugatuck, because the silt in these rivers builds up. And then the Army Corps of Engineers has to go out there and dredge them out. So wild rice is one of the plants that I work with in terms of restoring the Kalamazoo River, will actually hold sediment back. And that's connected to just in the last 10 years, I've seen a new invasive called the Asian narrow-leaf cattail, which is, there's some marshes I've been to, that's all I see out there. And the difference is, the Asian narrow-leaf cattail does not play well with other plants. The native cattails will be part of a form of a great mixture of plants, and the invasive narrow-leaf cattail just dominates the whole landscape. So what we're facing now, and this is, it might be a little counterintuitive there, what I'm going to say next, but my goal was to take every single narrow-leaf cattail out and replace it with native plants. It's impossible to do that. It's impossible to get every single zebra mussel at this point and quagga mussel out of the Great Lakes. And I was frustrated. I was not down with adapting to climate change. 15, 20 years ago, I thought we could stop it, you know? And I realize now that if we stopped all of our polluting activities, we have 100 years of warming built into the system. What my elders encouraged me to do, which I didn't even like to consider it, but upon thinking about it, and I was talking to elders about this new cattail that I saw in the marshes. They asked me a question which is so simple that was beyond my understanding. What are the birds doing? You know, are the birds adapting to that? And then, you know, because we listen to the birds to see what they do, I see what the birds eat, you know, what they fish for, what they like to eat. And I did notice that the birds I'm commonly seeing with our native cattail, they're living in the invasive part of it. And so rather than getting rid of all those invasives at this point, which are impossible, we can't treat it all chemically, we can't treat it with glyphosate, you can eat it. So just 2 years ago, I had my first narrow-leaf cattail that I ate. And I've been eating other cattails for a long time. It was a little different, but the part right above the rootstock, it's like a cucumber celery with a little bit of peppery taste in it. And if you slice it and dice it and put it in a salad, it's really good, okay? So part of it is the birds have adapted to the change of the invasives. That's part of our responsibility. And we learn a lot about the environment from watching animals and birds and see how they live. We have stories about how different animals have introduced different things into our lives. The problem with the invasives, though, is that while change has always been part of our lives, the invasives are happening faster than we're used to changing. It's a very rapid change that I've just seen. Just 7 years ago now, I took my children to see the emerald ash borer, okay? And I went to the Sleeping Bear Dunes, which is a beautiful part of the world. And 7 years ago, 30% of those trees in the Sleeping Bear Dunes on Lake Michigan were ash trees. They're gone. Every single one of those trees is gone. I have a 13 and a 14-year-old. They're going on 43, actually. I had to make sure that they knew what it was. I took them to Sleeping Bear. There was a scientist there looking at the emerald ash borer, which came in through Detroit on a pallet of shipping. And we have much more invasive species coming through the waterways and the ballast water of ships, which is a big part of the industrial infrastructure for shipping of materials, products out of the state of Michigan. But I wanted my kids to have a memory of the ash tree, which is a very important tree for our peoples in terms of basket making, canoe struts, our transportation systems. And that's what our people use for trade. The Ottawa word means trader. And we use the waterways as transportation systems before the roadways were introduced. So maintaining those waterways and operating them, and they're still used as transportation. You need to know that through the Mackinac Straits and through actually right above that, that feeds into the watershed, Lake Superior through the Sault Ste. Marie Canal system, has more tonnage and shipping coming through that system than the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal combined. It's that great of an economic piece of infrastructure, okay? And my dream is, when you build a road infrastructure, even the electric car doesn't take you away from maintaining road infrastructure, which is still oil-based. You've got a lot of oil and aggregate and rock material that's a lot of mining, and you don't use electric machines to pull those out of there. You got to use oil and gas at this point. So in restoring the environment, in looking at managing invasives, because unfortunately, my dream of getting rid of all the invasives ain't going to happen. Part of it is adapting to it. Part of it is mitigating some of the impacts. And so invasives, unfortunately, are part of our lives right now. And my elders have helped me to understand it differently than just, I'm going to go fight them all and take them all out, which I thought was possible 20 years ago. I'm still not really comfortable and fully. But those are some of the things that we have to do as a society. The silver carp. One of the strategies is to look at all the recipes for silver carps. There's cooking contests, and chefs are coming up with new dishes. That Asian carp is just right out of Chicago. There's just an electric barrier separating it from the Great Lakes, and they're already finding samples, I believe, of the Asian carp in the Great Lakes watershed. And that will decimate what's left of the fisheries, apparently. So invasives are a huge problem. It's not a simple matter of getting rid of them all. There's a level of multiple strategies right now. And part of that, for me and for all of us, is watching how the rest of the natural environment is adapting to the new biota, the new invasives that are here. And I'm still struggling with that. But I just wanted to mention it's not, we're beyond the point of just getting rid of them all. You've got to think of multiple levels of strategies to manage or mitigate the damaging impact. And again, the problem with the narrow-leaf cattail is that it doesn't play well with other plants. Our native cattail will exist in an environment with lots of other flowers, medicines, food plants, where the invasive species just dominates the entire landscape and blots out other forms of life. Just one last point, plantain, which is a plant that grows in your driveway probably, or all over the place in Michigan. That was brought over from Europe too. But it's not invasive in the sense that it plays well within the environment, and our people have made medicines of that. Again, my elders told me this. Look at the plantain, we've used it now for medicine. And that was a plant that was brought over. So invasives, not all plants from overseas are bad, but when they come over here and dominate the landscape and blot out the biological diversity that we have, that's when they become problems.
One of the interesting things about the Great Lakes from an ecosystem, natural perspective is that the Great Lakes are a relatively young system. They're only 10, 15,000 years old. They have been isolated from the Atlantic Ocean until the 1950s when ships were able to, because of the improvements in the navigation system, the creation of locks, they had been isolated. And because of their young age and because of that isolation, they're young and they're not as diverse and adaptable. They're more sensitive. They're really exquisitely sensitive to invaders and non-native species. But the interesting thing about natural systems, that one of the things that I've learned is that if you give them a chance, if you can prevent further perturbations and invasions, they often are able to rebound and they're resilient.
Yes.
And so with help from people, natural systems can survive and flourish. And I think the same is true for people. If given a chance, if we stop the bleeding, we're going to be okay. I want to wrap up this formal part in just a minute, but I want to give any of you an opportunity to say any concluding words about your perspective on the future for Michigan and the Great Lakes state.
Well, you said resilience, which is great, and it's a word that means a lot to me for a lot of reasons. I think about it every day in terms of what I have to go through as a human being on the planet, and what we have to go through as a people to really shift the paradigm into a time that works better for us and our children, and that's a responsibility. And also, one of my mentors was Bob Russell, who he studied resilience all the way up until his passing. So resilience is the ability to absorb shock and maintain function. So we all have to absorb shock, we all have to maintain function. And one of the concepts within resilience is this idea of feedback loops. So with a lot of what we're talking about, that's citizen monitoring. That's us as citizens, as voters, as residents, as consumers, as human beings, to keep an eye on what's going on and provide those feedback loops and to knock down the doors of our elected leaders and to really push people who are running for office to stand up and make a difference and be a servant, really, to the people. And this is a really important time for us to look out for ourselves and our neighbors and to really put down our weapons and figure out how we can do this together, you know? And we need to engage with people that we might even be afraid of and have a conversation, find that basic humanity, and figure out what we can do together. And those are important things for us to consider as individuals, but also, I mean, you talked about what we can do to advocate for natives. And it's like, we have treaties that we can breathe life into that are going to help all of us. And the indigenous people of this continent are disproportionately affected, you know, by rampant abuse and exploitation. People of color are disproportionately affected. And our whole society was built on genocide and slavery. So these are things we have to not be afraid of, not be afraid to talk about, but just get right in there, show up, listen, be resilient as a person, take care of yourself as an activist, because we're going to need you for life. And teach your children well, truly. You know, and for me, it's like, if I didn't have creativity, I know that I would burn out because there's just too much to do. But if you have a creative process, if you have a river that you can go to, it'll breathe life back into you. So you're going to have to take care of yourself. You're going to have to be resilient. You're going to have to build resilience into the society that you live in. And if you're of use to your community is going to take care of you. And don't be afraid to be an activist. Don't be afraid to use your voice and to teach your children to do the same thing.